Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov chess channel and welcome back to our Queen's Gambit series. So in this series we're covering some very important defenses and some sidelines of defenses after the first moves d4 and d5 and then c4 by white, and today we're continuing as usual with the so-called Slav defense. We have analyzed the Slav defense now in a couple of videos, and today we continue with a different variation of the Slav defense. It's the so-called Schlechter variation. The Schlechter variation is a part of the three knights variation that we have also analyzed in the Slav defense, but with a different continuation by black, with the continuation with the moves g6 and bishop to g7 here by black. So let's check out now what's all about. Then we're talking a little bit more about the positional ideas of whites and blacks, and we're then also analyzing some games, what kind of a mistake, the usual mistake you can make from whites and from black perspective in this very important line. So here we can maybe have this setup: d4 d5, knight to f3, knight to f6, c4 c6, and we have now knight to c3, the three knights variation of the Slav defense. And now comes the main difference, it's the move g6. This move g6 is perfectly fine because bishop to g7 will happen and the black can simply rely on this long diagonal. In one particular moment I think black can also play the move c5 and breaking through. But what I don't like always from black perspective in the Schlechter variation is that basically black is always reacting to white's next move. So it's not that the black is dominating in the game, it's always a reaction by black. That's I think the main issue here, because white has now several options. So white has now the move queen to b3, bishop to f4, bishop to g5, c takes d5, maybe even bishop to f4, e3, then knight to e5, h4, h5 is even here a possibility. So it's always white that's doing that is doing something, and black is always reacting to white's ideas. That's what I don't like in the Schlechter variation play by black, because I think when we watch now the structure in the center, it's similar to the Grunfeld. But if you're familiar with the Grunfeld defense, black always plays this very aggressive move c5 immediately, so black doesn't lose any tempo with c6 and then c5. Black always plays first move c5 immediately, breaking through in the center. So that's why I think this setup c6 and then afterwards the potential move c5 would be sort of a loss of tempo. So as I said, the Schlechter variation, I think it's a good opening, it's a firm opening, you can have an equal game from black's perspective. But I think, as I said, that white is always slightly better. White is always trying to do something. Black has to, in the first maybe 10-15 moves, always has to react, has to wait and see what white is going to do. So let's check out now potential continuations from this. As I said, it's basically white that always chooses now the continuation of the game. So we're analyzing first now this move, c takes d5. I like to play myself this move c takes d5 when I play the Schlechter against the Schlechter variation, because I don't play the Schlechter as black. I play different ideas of the Slav defense. As I said, I simply don't like it. But still, we're seeing now after the move c takes d5, what I don't like if for black here is the move knight takes d5, because as we said, it's similar to the Grunfeld, but we haven't played so far the c5 move. The c5 move is the natural move, but you want to play of course that move, but you have already played with your c pawn. Now c5 would be sort of a loss of tempo. Here after move knight to d5 we can play immediately the move e4 here from white's perspective, and I think after move knight to c7 that black is already in serious trouble. And I wanted to show you here a great gameplay by Andrei Rakhmagulov against Valery Filipov here in this particular line. Here it's unbelievable that already after the move knight to c7 you see black is already in serious trouble. Black is kicked away by the central pawn storm that white has built here, and now there are even several options: h4, h5. Here is an option for white, bishop to e3, queen to d2, maybe even going into this fianchetto attacks. Also h3, bishop to e2, bishop to e3, going into more positional lines, going into normal healthy setup. So as I said, when we watch now these ideas for white, this is one of the main ideas that you can play against the Schlechter. We're analyzing also some different lines in the continuation. There are of course bishop to f4, bishop to g5 moves. As I said, these are also great ideas here for white. You can also try queen to b3. So as I said, you can try even h4, h5 immediate attacks, but here we're analyzing first this idea, c takes d5. As I said, here the best way for black is simply to take with the pawn. So c takes d5 is a must move. Knight to d5 is already a very bad game, so that's why I'm pointing out this move, because now after move knight to d5, you see now what white is doing here. Bishop to e2, we have bishop to g7, h3 preventing, like in the Grunfeld, if you're familiar with the Grunfeld ideas, if you play bishop to g4, then maybe you could further attack here the knight on f3 and also then continue the pressure against the weak d4 square. But as I said, it's simply a loss of tempo here for black. Black wants, of course, to break the position with the move c5. So far it's not possible because you simply lose the pawn, so it's, I think, already a bad game here for black. So in the game here, Rakhmangulov played castling. Also Rakhmangulov played, of course, normal development here, bishop to e3. All of these games that we're analyzing now will be in the description below, so you can, of course, check them out for themselves, maybe find also some other strategical and tactical ideas in the game. Bishop to e3, we have now e5. It seems so that now with the move white has several problems, and it seems so that black is solving now all of the position problems, but actually it's not so, because after move d5 we have now knight to b6. If you try here something like c takes d5, after e takes d5, you see, although it seems like black has something here on the king side with the move f5, this move d6 I think is simply too much to handle. You have to move your knight somewhere. Bishop to c4 will happen, knight to g5, knight to f7 is also a serious threat. So I think this pawn on the d file is simply too much to handle here for black. Black is simply tactically lost. So after move d5 here in the continuation, knight to b6 was played, but now d takes c6. After b takes c6, we have now a4, and the problem is now obvious here. It's to idle the pawn here on c6. So far white has a pleasant game. White has provoked at least some kind of a weakness here. It's the weak c6 pawn. So as I said, here from this point on, it was basically a one-way ticket for white. So knight to e6, we have a5, kicking away the knight, knight to d7, queen to d6, knight to b8, and now queen to b4. Bishop to a6 was played, bishop takes, knight takes a6, queen to c4, and again we can notice that the c6 pawn is simply a long-term weakness. In the continuation of the game, we have queen to c8, rook to d1, of course occupying the only file, the only open file on the board. We have queen to b7, rook to d6, we have rook to c8, and now rook to d1. Here white is building this very important battery. We have rook to c7, and now a very nice tactic, rook takes e6, we have f takes e6, knight to g5, here simply taking, and now very nice move, rook to d7, here rook to c7, and now a very cool move here also by white, knight to f7 in this position. Black resigned. If you take, of course, you get simply here this one. You cannot take, of course, then you get simply queen to e8, you get bishop to f8, and now queen to f8 is checkmate. So, but that wasn't the point, of course, of this game. The main problem, I think, that we have to say here is after the potential c takes d5, that black should not take out here with the knight, because it's not this Grunfeld defense. In the Grunfeld, we are already playing the move c5. Now after move knight to d5, you see after e4, knight takes c3. Okay, you could do it also here, but after b takes c3, white is now a dominant central position. Now the c5 is a little bit too slow. Bishop to e3, bishop to e2, queen to d2 will happen. Maybe even h4, h5 is a possibility here. So as I said, I see only here only winning games here for white, and only draw games for white in the database. So no winning games in this particular line in top grandmaster level. So let's check out now a different idea also for white, also for black. Again, we have the Schlechter variation. Again, one of the great ways for white can be simply this releasing pressure idea, c takes d5. We have now normal move here by black, c takes d5, and now bishop to g5. Here bishop to g7. We have queen to b3, and it's an instructive gameplay by Wu Yangzi against Andrasian. Here after move queen to b3, we have now knight to c6. Very tricky move because you cannot do this. Bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6. You would love, of course, to play here the move knight to d5, but actually it's not possible because you get also the counter attack. And now after move knight to c3, you see black can also recapture the pawn here on the d file, knight takes d4, and here after bishop to d4, it's black that has, I think, a comfortable game with the bishop pair on the board. Black is, I think, much better here. So that's why after move knight to c6 here, e3 played by Bu Yangji, and now we can can notice after move e6 that basically it's a symmetrical game. Whenever you have the symmetrical game with symmetrical pawn structure and this static center setup that we have talked about many times in our videos, the main goal, it's obvious that we want to occupy simply these weaknesses in the continuation of the game. So from white perspective, we're trying to occupy the e5 square and also the c5 square, basically the squares that are supported by the d4 pawn. And from black perspective, we want to occupy, of course, here the e4 square, but also the c4 square would be a nice square, maybe with the knight to come somehow on c4. So far it's not possible because the bishop and the queen are protecting the square, but maybe as a long-term plan this could be also the strategical goal. So whenever you see the symmetrical pawn structures, that's actually the main goal, to create some dynamics. So here, as I said, knight to e5, knight to c5, or knight to e4, knight to c4 outposts here for white and for black. So okay, the evaluation is slightly better here for white because white has a dominant position with the minor pieces. White has a better activity. You see all of the pieces are on natural squares. Bishop is good. Knights are on natural squares. Bishop still has a great activity. Queen has a great activity. You see now, because of black's lack of development by the light square bishop, it's a slightly better, of course, position here for white. So bishop to d3, we have castling, h6 here. Black tried here a dangerous idea to weaken the pawn structure further. We have bishop to h4, g5, bishop to g3, knight to h5, chasing the bishop. Here rook to c1, knight takes g3, h6 g3, and it seems so that this was good, but actually I don't like this idea by black. Although you still have the bishop pair, you still have some kind of a potential outpost, you have still opportunities maybe to break here on the queen side. But the problem is, I think, actually this one for both sides, you cannot play the move e5, you cannot play the move e4 also for white's perspective. You cannot open the position, you cannot break enter somehow, because if you do that, then you're leaving also isolated pawn. So you see, even if this, for instance, pawn on d5 or on d4 would be protected, the main issue, if you try, for instance, to open the position for the light square bishop, is that you're weakening the d5 pawn. So that's why opening the center is not an opportunity for any of this side. So that's why I don't like simply black's idea here, black's approach of the game. Although the pawn structure here on the g file is doubled, although of course black has the bishop pair, but I think the knights are slightly better here because of these opportunities to even play knight to a4. And as we said, knight to c5 is very dangerous because you cannot protect anymore your c5 square with the move b6. When you do that, then of course also the knight on c6 is a little bit weak. So as I said, slightly better position here for black, but this chasing idea with h6 g5 then knight to h5 was simply, I think, a loss of tempo here for black. In the continuation, bishop to d7, we have rook from f to d1, g4 trying to further kick away the knight, but actually it's just improving the knight's position. We have here knight to d2, we have h5, you see now knight to e2, and we have now opportunities to get really the best squares on the board. Knight to f4 is really great. Again, you cannot protect this f4 square with the move e5. When you do that, then again, I'm pointing out this d5 is weak. So as I said, outposts are here the best ideas for both sides. So far, I think with the knight on the board, white has more options to create some outposts in the continuation of the game. So knight to e2, we have rook to b8, knight on f4, we have queen to g5, we have bishop to b1, threatening also here queen to d3, then also some dangerous checks here around the square h7. We have the rook from f to d8, queen to d3, and now here f5 was played, of course, locking the light square diagonal. But whenever you play, of course, on light squares, you see this bishop is really bad. The bishop on d7 is a bad bishop. You don't have good opportunities to develop it. The dark square bishop seems like a good piece, but again, it's not a good piece, I think, because again, if you want to open the position for the dark square bishop with the move e5, you cannot do that because of the weakness of the d5. So both of these bishops are basically paralyzed. The only good piece maybe on the board could be the knight, maybe with some, again, I'm pointing out, maybe with some b5 ideas, then knight to a5, and then knight to c4 ideas, maybe cementing this knight on this very active square. So here in the continuation, knight to b3, b6 was played, rook takes c6. Here white found a great tactic, and now knight to e6, grabbing a pawn. Here knight takes d8, and here after rook takes d8, it was completely winning endgame, because here we have also queen to f5, and after a couple more moves, black simply resigned. So you see, these ideas to chase the bishops is not so good. It's a symmetrical position, so the bishops are not so much stronger in symmetrical position than in usual dynamic positions, because let's go back after move c takes d5, c takes d5, we can notice that black or white cannot play the move e4 or here e5 to open the position to create dynamics, because when you do that, then these pawns get simply isolated in the center. The d4 could be long-term weak as d5. So I don't think that the bishops are so much stronger here. So it's one of these positions where I think the knight is equal to the bishops. Whenever you feel this symmetrical positions, you should really also evaluate your knight strength, I think, in the continuation of the game. So we saw although black here kicked away the bishop with here h6 ideas, then g5, knight to h5, all of this move just to grab the bishop. Okay, if that's good, I'm not sure. Here in the continuation of the game, we saw that with the knights on the board, white had really pleasant position. So let's check out now one other example. It's a great gameplay by Lee Kwang Liam against Yu Yangyi. Yu Yangyi played here, I think, a really instructive game in the Schlechter variation of the Slav defense. Here knight to c3, again g6. We have again this idea c takes d5. I think the approach here of blacks is much better. We have bishop to f4, also one of the opportunities here for white. Bishop to g7, e3, here casting, we have h3, knight to e4. That's, I think, a great opportunity here for black, because the pawn structure gets really dynamic, and I think here it's a common mistake that white can make in the continuation of the game. Here white took simply knight takes e4, which wasn't the best of moves. I think here simply rook to c1 is much better. We're waiting black to take, because now black if black takes on c3, then after rook to c3, we can say that black has played now many times with the same knights. First, of course, knight and f6, then knight and e4, then the third time just in order to trade off one knight. It's not good, of course, so that's why here I think in the continuation of the game, here white made a mistake. Knight takes e4, we have d takes e4, and as we said in the beginning of the video, the only way to create dynamics is through outpost. So here black created an outpost on e4, white traded off, but now the pawn structure is asymmetrical, and again new things are happening on the board. Here in the continuation we have knight to d2, but now f5, and suddenly it's black that has here dominant position on in the center. This pawn on e4 is very annoying. f3, if you try f3 to maybe kick it away, it's again not so good. Then you're weakening your dark squares in front of the king. You have already played also with the move h3, so that's why here so far an equal game. But I like black's approach here. As I said, f5, here in the continuation rook to c1 was played, knight to c6, we have knight to c4, also trying to occupy here the e5 square. In the continuation, bishop to e6, bishop to e2, and now a very nice idea, bishop to d5, creating the blockade here, and e6. Okay, again, if we evaluate the strength of this bishop is obviously not a good piece. It's here only part of the pawn chain. It's simply blocked out by its own pawns. But the problem is, I think, also for white, that the white doesn't have a good activity. This bishop although has a good activity, but it's aiming into nothing. This knight on c4, if you play knight on e5, again you're blocking out your bishop. Bishop here on e2 is also not so good. So as I said, at least this bishop on d5 is playing a defensive role. It's fixed to this e6 pawn. Then no light square attacks are possible here for white, maybe through this diagonal. And from this point on, it was a very cool game here by black. In the continuation, queen to d2, but now we have g5 because we have advanced pawn on e4. Here black simply pushed the pawn further. We have now even f4, great attack here by black. We have bishop to g4, queen to f6, knight to d6, attacking the b7 pawn, but not the problem. Here black simply proceeded with normal attacking opportunities. Here we simply don't care about the b7 now. The activity by the rook, by this bishop, by this pawns here is simply, I think, too much to handle. In the continuation, we have e takes f4, g takes f4. Here bishop to f4 was taken, but now now h5, great here move by black. Bishop has to retreat, but now here after move e3 in this position, white resigns. So of course the queen is hanging, and also we have this checkmate threat on g2. But that's not the point. I wanted to show really a cool tactic in the end. It was a brilliant game here by black, but the main issue I think here after move knight to e4 for white was that white took knight takes e4. You see created here white with the trade of knight created new dynamics in the game after d takes e4. Okay, white had a counter attack here against this pawn on e4, but now with f5 it was simply black that had a dominant position here in the center. Black has this advanced pawn, and white had several positional problems in the continuation of the game. So as said, this is a sort of a video in which we're showing, I think, the common mistakes that you can make, like in this first example where black simply recaptured with a knight, allowed here white some central pawn breakthroughs with the move e3, e4, attacking simply the knight to c7, and now bishop to e2, h3. We saw from this point on white has a dominant game. So here also in this example we saw that chasing the bishops and maybe trying to trade off the knight for a bishop is not such a great idea here, because the knights are perfectly fine in symmetrical structures, and here in this position we have talked about the space advantages by trading off the pieces. So we have seen this positional improvements by our knight outposts on the squares that we have talked about, e5, e4, or maybe c5, c4 here from white's and from black's perspective. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. So we'll continue now to follow the Schlechter variation of the Slav defense with some different ideas, and also with some top engine games, for instance like Stockfish 13, Lila 0, and many of these great engines. We'll see their approach in the Schlechter variation of the Slav defense. I think it will be very interesting. They're playing the Schlechter variation really differently, really wild stuff. So as said, be prepared. This is also a very important line that you have to be familiar if you want to play against the Slav defense or the Slav defense yourself. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you want to study the Slav defense more, check out my whole series. Here's the link of our Slav defense series. And if you have trouble maybe to play as black, check out my hyper accelerated Dragon Sicilian defense series and my Nimzo Indian defense series as good responses to d4 and e4. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.